Our ancient sacred text is 2 Corinthians 5, 16 through 21. And so, from now on, we don't look at anyone in terms of mere human judgment. Even if we did once regard Christ in these terms, that is not how we know Christ now. And for anyone who is in Christ, there is a new creation. The old order has passed away. Now everything is new. All of this is from God, who ransomed us through Christ and made us ministers of that reconciliation. This means that through Christ, the world was fully reconciled again to God, who didn't hold our transgressions against us, but instead entrusted us with this message of reconciliation. This makes us Christ's ambassadors, as though God were making the appeal directly through us. Therefore, we implore you in Christ's name, be reconciled to God. For our sake, God made the one who is without sin to be sin, so that by this means we might become the very holiness of God. Holy wisdom, holy word.
Thanks be to God.
Good morning.
Good morning.
It feels good to be back here with you all. The last 3 of the 4 Sundays I have been out. My child was sick, and then I was sick. Then I was here, and then Brian and I and Hollow went on a camping trip to the Olympic Peninsula this past week. It was raining. We had a camper van that we borrowed from friends, so it would stay dry. Can you all hear me okay? I feel like I've got it in the right spot now. Okay. Well, yeah, so it's wonderful to be here again. I'm going to move this back a little bit too. I can see folks. Well, we did get back about midweek this weekend on Friday night. We had dinner with some friends, or we had some friends over for dinner to hang out with us. And our friend Jeff told us that they recently discovered that in the basement of one of his ancestors' homes was a secret room that his ancestors used in the Underground Railroad. And unfortunately, this home is no longer in their family anymore. But our conversation and our thoughts turned a little bit to what that might have been like, and what the times called upon folks. I've been reading a book by Apprentice Hemphill. I also gave it to Nancy for her birthday. I don't know if she knows that yet. And in it, Apprentice Hemphill talks about how much they love Harriet Tubman, who of course was one of the more famous conductors of the Underground Railroad. Folks called her Moses as well, leading folks to the Promised Land. She was born in 1822, and she escaped from slavery in 1849, 26, 27 years old. And she took some folks think it's closer to 20, some others say around 13, but either way, many, many, many trips back and forth to help lead folks into freedom, to smuggle folks into freedom through secret rooms in the night. And one of the quotes that struck me as I was reading this was talking about, that Apprentice Hemphill wrote about Harriet Tubman, was that she defied the seemingly immovable logic of her time. The seemingly immovable logic of her time. So, our modern sacred text today, I think, sorry, I'm looking at the Zoom situation. Our modern sacred text, has some ideas that can feel challenging. Abolition of prisons. big ideas, big words. Sometimes it can be hard to imagine, right? How would we live in a world without prisons? How would anybody ever... I guess I won't. I don't know. I almost don't want to complete the sentence. How would anybody... I think the way that our minds are... The way that our wired structures want us to think about it. It's like, how would anybody ever learn their lesson if there wasn't punishment of some kind? But Angela Davis's quote starts to get into this a little bit. She talks about abolition of prisons is not actually this movement about prisons going away alone. It's about imagining what a whole entire world might be like. What are the systems and the structures? What do people need? What are the basic things that people need? Homes, homes, love, big beautiful trees, air to breathe, water. Angela Davis herself has quite a story. Born in 1944 in Birmingham, Alabama. Of course, we know Birmingham, Alabama in the 60s was the site of the church bombings, which killed 4 little black girls. The Ku Klux Klan church, we might call them terrorist bombings, right? And at this time, Angela Davis was in college, and she knew she had connection with those 4 girls. Later on, she, while she was in college and in her formation, was supported by communist thinkers. And she moved to Germany and did her graduate studies in Germany and Frankfurt, where she was exposed to even more ideas around communism. And she moved back to the States and became an activist. So many folks might be more familiar with her as an activist than a scholar. She founded an organization called Critical Resistance in 1997 that worked for prison abolition. Worked. Actually, I don't know if it worked. The movement continues. And in 2003, she wrote this book that our text is taken from. And I don't know, I guess I share all of this to kind of say, abolition, in some ways, it's hard inside of our own contexts to imagine what else might be. But that is a place to start, with our imagining. And that's some of what we are trying to do in this Lenten season. This theme today is out of empire toward reconciliation. And we're trying to look at some different lectionary texts and Lenten texts through the lens of empire. That Jesus and his followers were having these conversations about having new life in Christ, becoming a new being in Christ, within the context of imperial oppression. What does that mean for how we understand these spiritual political teachings about the sacredness of life? So, this is also I have never read Angela Davis. This is kind of a delightful experience of the modern sacred text not having been kind of handpicked by me, where I get to be like, I know this text. So I got to learn more about Angela Davis. And but this is all to say, I'm not an expert. I'm doing some thinking out loud, I think, with you all today. And I did a little extra reading. So there's a different thinker named Marianne Kaba, who is an organizer now. And she wrote this book, We Do This Till We Free Us. And I thought her definition was really helpful to me. The prison industrial complex abolition is a vision, an imagination, right? Of a restructured society in a world where we have everything we need: food, shelter, education, health, art, beauty, clean water, and more things that are foundational to our personal and community safety. When we restrict it to being about prisons, it doesn't work. When we think about our society now, right, we're trying to think about how do we get to this place. Even so, that can feel really big, kind of overwhelming, especially perhaps in this moment in which we're in, where so much seems to be crumbling. Where it's hard for me to kind of take a step every day and not actually just feel literally queasy and sick to my stomach. Everything that's changing, everything that's breaking. So it can help, I think, for me to get a little bit smaller in scale. Bring it down a little bit more to perhaps relationships, to communities. So a lot of folks actually that are involved in abolitionist work are also involved in movements like transformative justice, that are thinking about how do we resolve conflict in ways that center repair and healing. This is family. It's a little different from my own. But if we ask ourselves, when we are seeking justice, when we've been wronged or hurt or harmed in some way, what is it that we're seeking from the outcome? Really, truly. When someone's being, are we seeking change? What is it that our system is designed to do? Is our system designed to actually accomplish the things that we long for? If what we're longing for is repair or healing. So if we bring it, again, closer to the community, transformative justice movements was designed, often is led, by those communities for whom our carceral system does not work. Our system of incarcerating as a way to punish or bring about change or bring about safety doesn't work, especially for Black and brown and immigrant communities and queer communities, right? Because actually what's happening is that the systems, the carceral system, will just kind of see all those folks as bad, in broad strokes, right? So it's designed as a process to keep people out of this carceral system. And to stay in relationship, and not out of accountability, but to stay in accountability in relationship with one another, with the person or people who have been harmed. Okay, this is a different model for accountability. It's a relational model. And actually, the community here at Salt and Light in Lebanon has a couple of stories that reflect this. I'm thinking in Terry Moe's book, The Bush Still Burns, he talks about, is it Scott, Brazil? And so maybe later, if someone feels like they want to help to share that story, I don't know the story very well, but essentially it's a story where one of our community members betrayed the community in some way. And in a way where likely, actually, I think the community could have, called the police and said, bring this person to justice, right? It didn't do that. That is not what happened here. Instead, this person was brought deeper into relationship, deeper into accountability. And they took accountability. And they made repair. This is what I understand of this story. So maybe later, I would invite someone to share this story. This is kind of what we're talking about. So sometimes, right, we think about these things like, oh, how do we do this? It's already right here. We're already practicing it. We already know how. And that doesn't mean it's easy. I think that lots of us already know this, but it helped me to have to have Mariam Kaba share this back with me, that punishment, right? Incarceration in particular, crime rates don't reduce when incarceration goes up. Actually, what is correlated with crime is economic precarity. And remember this too, crime and harm are not synonymous, meaning these are her words, all that is criminalized isn't harmful. Okay? Not everything that people are imprisoned for is harmful. And not all harm is criminalized. The system's broken. It's broken. It doesn't mean, also saying this, it doesn't mean that there aren't good people within that system trying to make it better, trying to do good, trying to protect people, trying to create healing. This is all of ours. It doesn't help to say, hey, those people that are part of the system, we're not going to work with them. I think that's something that I've been guilty of in the not so distant past. But it's all ours. We need each other to figure it out. Okay, so what does this have to do with Corinthians, right? Well, let's look at the text. What strikes me about this text is talking about in Christ, there's a new creation. When we come into relationship with the sacred, things change for us. When we come into relationship with love, we are transformed. 2 Corinthians, scholars think was actually multiple letters. Maybe that's important, maybe not, but one of the reasons it could be important is that if there are multiple letters, it means there are many exchanges happening between Paul and the Corinthians. I mean, we already know that there's 1 Corinthians, and then there's 2 Corinthians. There's at least 2. But within 2nd, there's some back and forth. And usually when letters are taking place, it's because there's a conversation taking place. And if there's a conversation taking place, it means that maybe not everybody's agreeing about something all the time. We're working it out. We're teasing things out. One of the things that brings me a lot of comfort, I think, about the Bible. And we talked about this a little bit when Salt and Light, we talked about this in our series on baptism and communion last fall, that early followers of Jesus, there's tons of diversity. Lots of people trying to figure out how to follow the teachings and the life of Jesus and the values that he put forward, that he taught. trying to figure out how to do that, and a lot of differences of opinions. And so actually, some scholars think that Paul and the Corinthians had different Christologies, which is a fancy word to say, kind of like, what did Christ mean? And Paul's Christology was really focused on the embodied resurrection of Jesus and of Jesus' followers. That's something, that they would be resurrected in bodies. And that was kind of the crucial piece. It seems like the folks in Corinth had a different idea. That the folks in Corinth were interested in being transformed in this life. This one that we've got here on earth. I read all of this. This is a scholar, Arminta Fox, a biblical scholar from Augustana University in South Dakota, which I just have to include because that's where my parents went to school. And then, so I was like, oh, cool, Dr. Fox. So it's helpful. It's helpful to know that even from the very beginning, Christians were working to figure out what does it mean, this thing about being transformed, about experiencing death and new life. Is it literal? Is it figurative? Is it true? Is it truth? Another thing that I want to point to in the text is there's a lot about reconciliation here. This word reconciliation, which I think is I wonder if this is why, we have Angela Davis in conversation with this text. Well, the Greek is kata alasso. And that's actually two words. Alasso means change. And kata means something like very. It's a prefix, like extra change. So we could translate it as radical change. Transformation. To be made new. In Christ, we are a new creation. The old has passed away. So I think we have this modern idea of what is reconciliation. But reconciliation is very consistent with this idea of a new creation, which again reminds me of our conversations on baptism in the fall at Salt and Light. That baptism is a sacrament that we undergo when we experience this transformation. At least that's what we see in the texts of early Jesus followers. People stepping into the Jordan, ready to be transformed. And after this process of transformation, their lives were changed. In Galatians, Paul quotes what scholars think is one of the earliest Christian hymns. In Christ, there is neither Jew nor Greek, neither enslaved or slave nor free, neither male and female. This is a baptismal creed. So when we become transformed, these ways that we organize ourselves in society here on earth dissolve. This is the idea of new creation, of transformation, of being reconciled. In God, there is new creation, there is a new way of relating to one another. And not only that, let's see. All of this is from God who ransomed us through Christ and made us ministers of that reconciliation. We are ministers of transformation. This is what it means to be a follower of Christ. ministers of radical change. So I think again about our theme of empire for Lent. Empire seeks control. And if we don't collaborate with that control, then it seeks to punish, sometimes to incarcerate. Christ seeks to transform, seeks to make us new in this way that dissolves the social hierarchies between us. This still feels a little bit, right, heavy. Okay, great. So how do I be a minister of radical change? You know, I'm having a hard time kind of just, getting out of bed in the morning sometimes, right? It's a lot of hard times. How can we be made new? Especially, it's like we aren't always struck with inspiration. We can't necessarily wait for it to happen to us. So I turn to Prentice Hemphill again, because Prentice Hemphill talks about how does change happen, especially within us. How does change happen within a person? And they also say that change, right, is connected. So change that happens within me impacts change that happens within you, and vice versa. And that impacts our whole community, and it spirals outward and outward and outward. Our community impacts our city, and so forth. Our city impacts our nation, one might hope. So usually, this might be good news, might be bad news, but change usually happens internally very slowly. Not always, sometimes very fast, but it's usually slow. But we can enact it. And Hemphill talks about practice. Practice, practice, practice. They say we are always practicing something. We're always practicing something. What are we practicing today? What are you practicing today? So if we're always practicing something, and then we begin opening our minds to what it is that we are practicing, then we can be intentional about shifting our practice. Hemphill says that repetition, the more we repeat something, leads to something like muscle memory. And muscle memory leads to embodiment. It becomes a part of our being, of how we are. They talk about three things that feel important. One is the practice. Two is we learn through mistakes. We change when we mess up. That's actually like one of the top ways that humans figure things out. Is we're like, well, dang, shouldn't have done that. Guess I'll do it different next time. Hopefully we remember next time. Sometimes it takes a few times, if you know what I mean. It takes me a few times. Mistakes and learning. Back to the repetition. Third, we went through grace and forgiveness. Okay, this is where now I just have to read from the book. Okay. They say, forgiveness and grace have much more to offer any culture than we give them credit for. They are rare sightings these days. Yet where I have seen them, when I've been offered them, I realize that they are not the weak, pitiful emotions of people who don't value themselves. Instead, they are the generous gift of people who know their worth cannot be diminished or compromised. They are a generous gift of people who know that their own worth cannot be diminished or compromised. When we offer grace or forgiveness, we refuse the false correlation between our worth and actions. We don't forgive out of our own desperation for another person. We forgive to invite one another back into our highest selves, back into our commitments. There is an acknowledgement that someone has been wronged or hurt, and forgiveness extends the possibility of trying again. We forgive to invite one another back into our highest selves so that we can have the benefit to learn, the benefit of trying to repeat, of trying that repetition again and again and again. It feels important to say also that this doesn't mean we tolerate abuse, right? That's not what they're saying, and they actually go on to say maybe all this that's out there. They wrote this book not long before, but before all of this more recent stuff was out there. Before all of that, rather than that, perhaps we start with each other, with the people with whom we are in relationship with. Because we hurt one another, we harm each other. It happens. I'm only in my brain. I'm not in yours. I don't know what's going to hurt you. So the way that we practice is we begin with ourselves. We begin with a community of practice, much like Scott and the Salt and Light community, or maybe it was a Redeemer community. It was Redeemer community at that time, right? We have a community of practice. And our practice, as we practice, and as it becomes muscle memory, and as it becomes embodied, this expands our ability to imagine what is possible. Getting back to this imagination part. And these things can feed one another. The more we change, the deeper our imagination can go. And I guess I want to close by saying that, it's been a hard time, right, lately, as we're taking in all of that is happening and changing. And I want to bring us back to people like Harriet Tubman. There are so many other names of so many other folks, but to remember that we are in a long arc of history, and that we're not alone in that long arc of history. Our ancestors accompany us. Who's another person? Jesus, teaching for love. Maybe Paul, the Corinthians, all of us trying to figure out, how do we make ourselves new again? How do we be with one another in ways that center love? So later on we will sing a song with the words, "We are not alone." And I'm going to try to take those words in and invite you to as well. But first, we will turn to our one-to-ones. We will turn to each other. In the Salt and Light community, we have a practice of one-to-one conversations where we trust that the wisdom that is shared here on Sunday mornings and all the time is amongst all of us. And so we turn to one another to share what got kicked up for us in this offering. And one question I might offer is, you could just start with well, what kicked up for me this morning, but also, what does it mean for us to see ourselves as ministers of transformation? What might that look like for you today? We no longer have a clock in the sanctuary, so I will just call you back in 5 minutes and you'll have to trust me.